Jubilees chapter 11. The sons of Noah began to war and to eat blood.
In Jubilees chapter 11, we witness the descendants of Noah entering a tumultuous era, marked by conflict, idol worship, and struggles against nature. The chapter introduces figures like Ru, Terah, and Abram, who play pivotal roles in the unfolding narrative. Amidst warfare and struggles with ravens devouring their crops, Abram, a young and righteous lad, emerges as a beacon of hope. His ability to command the ravens and protect the seed from their depredation earns him respect and admiration among the people of the Chaldees. As Abram grows and becomes increasingly aware of the world's errors and idolatrous practices, he turns away from idol worship, seeking a higher, more righteous path. His actions foreshadow the significant role he will play in the future, making him a central figure in the story of faith and righteousness in the Book of Jubilees. Chapter 11 begins in the 35th Jubilee. Anytime we come to a Jubilee date, described as years and weeks within a Jubilee cycle, we will calculate that date using the Smith Jubilee Formula. With that being said, let's get it.
Jubilees, chapter 11. Verse 1. And in the 35th Jubilee, in the 3rd week, in the 1st year thereof, Ru took to himself a wife, and her name was Orah, the daughter of Uar, the son of Kest, and she bare him a son, and he called his name Siro, in the 7th year of this week in this Jubilee.
Okay, let's get it. Now, in order to find the 35th Jubilee, it's important to know that every Jubilee year takes place on the 50th year in every Jubilee cycle. In order to find the 35th Jubilee, we begin by multiplying 35 by 50. This gives us the Jubilee year for the 35th Jubilee, which is 1750. Understand that 1750 is the final year of the 35th Jubilee cycle, and this year is called the Jubilee year. Because we need to calculate within this Jubilee cycle, it's important that we identify the first year of the 35th Jubilee cycle. And we do that by subtracting 49 years from the Jubilee year 1750. This gives us the first year in the 35th Jubilee cycle, which is the Jubilee year 1701. Did you see how we did that? We used the 50-year multiplication method when we multiplied 35 by 50. This gave us the Jubilee year 1750. Then we applied a 49-year subtraction from 1750, which is the year of the 35th Jubilee, and this gave us the Jubilee year 1701. This is the first year in the 1st week of the 35th Jubilee cycle. While we're at it, let's go ahead and find the final year of this Jubilee cycle. And this is how we do it. Since we already have the first year, all we need to do now is add the remaining 48 years to this Jubilee cycle. 1701 plus 48 is 1749. By utilizing a 50-year multiplication with a 49-year subtraction, we acquired the Jubilee year and the first year of the cycle, and then we added 48 years, which gave us the final year of the cycle. This is what is called the Smith Jubilee Formula. Now that we have the first and last years of the 35th Jubilee, we can now add the years and weeks mentioned in Jubilees chapter 11 verse 1, which is the first year of the 3rd week of the 35th Jubilee cycle. The Smith Jubilee Formula has already given us the first year of 1701. Now, all we need to do is add the remaining 2 weeks, which is 14 years, to our 1701. This brings us to the Jubilee year 1715. The first verse also says that Ru took to himself a wife, and her name was Orah, the daughter of Uar, the son of Kest, and she bore him a son, and he called his name Siro, in the 7th year of this week, in this Jubilee. This took place here. And if we add 6 more years to the year 1715, we get the Jubilee year 1721. This is the year that Ru was born. The next calculation will be done a bit quicker. But for now, let's continue reading in chapter 11.
Verse 2. And the sons of Noah began to war on each other, to take captives, and to slay each other, and to shed the blood of men on the earth, and to eat blood, and to build strong cities, and walls, and towers, and individuals began to exalt themselves above the nation, and to found the beginnings of kingdoms, and to go to war, people against people, and nation against nation, and city against city, and all began to do evil, and to acquire arms, and to teach their sons war, and they began to capture cities, and to sell male and female slaves. Verse 3. And Uar, the son of Kest, built the city of Era of the Chaldees, and called its name after his own name, and the name of his father. Verse 4. And they made for themselves molten images, and they worshipped each, the idol, the molten image, which they had made for themselves, and they began to make graven images, and unclean simulacra, and malignant spirits assisted, and seduced them into committing transgression and uncleanness. Verse 5. And the prince Mastema exerted himself to do all this, and he sent forth other spirits, those which were put under his hand, to do all manner of wrong, and sin, and all manner of transgression, to corrupt and destroy, and to shed blood upon the earth. Verse 6. For this reason he called the name of Siro, Serach, for every one turned to do all manner of sin and transgression. Verse 7. And he grew up, and dwelt in Uar of the Chaldees, near to the father of his wife's mother, and he worshipped idols, and he took to himself a wife, in the 36th Jubilee, in the 5th week, in the 1st year thereof, and her name was Milcah, the daughter of Cabir, the daughter of his father's brother.
Okay. Let's get it. This all took place in the 36th Jubilee. So, 36 times 50 is 1800. Minus 49 years is 1751, plus 48 is 1799. Okay, 1800 is the Jubilee year of the 36th Jubilee. 1751 is the first year, and 1799 is the final year in the 36th Jubilee cycle. Now we can calculate the first year, in the 5th week of the 36th Jubilee, which is right here. Okay. Here we go. 7 times 4 is 28, so we add 28 years to 1751, and we get the Jubilee year 1779. So what do we get from this? At this point, we know that Ru took a wife in 1715, and her name was Ora. 6 years later, they had a son named Siro in the Jubilee year 1721. We also know that it was around this time that all the children of Noah began to make war and started killing one another and worshipping idols. Then Siro took a wife, and her name was Milcah. This took place in the Jubilee year 1779. Now, if we take Siro's marriage year and subtract his birth year from his marriage year, we find that Siro was 58 years old when he and his wife Milcah were married. As 1779, the marriage year, minus 1721, Siro's birth year. Make Siro 58 at the time of his marriage to Milcah. Now, if you don't mind, get me verse 8.
Sure thing. Jubilees chapter 11. Verse 8. And she bore him Nahor in the 1st year of this week, and he grew and dwelt in Uar of the Chaldees, and his father taught him the researches of the Chaldees to divine and augur, according to the signs of heaven. It sounds like Siro and Milcah had a son named Nahor, and Siro taught his son Nahor how to research the Chaldees as an augur, according to the signs of heaven. There's only one question I need to ask, and that is, what is an augur?
An augur was a priest and official in the classical Roman world. His main role was the practice of augury, the interpretation of the will of the gods by studying events he observed within a predetermined sacred space, temple. The temple, a sacred sanctuary or shrine that was consecrated by a member of the priesthood for religious purposes. The augur corresponded to the heavenly space above. The augur's decisions were based on what he personally saw or heard from within the temple. They included things like thunder, lightning, and any accidental signs, such as falling objects, but in particular, bird signs. Whether the birds he saw flew in groups or alone, what noises they made as they flew, the direction of flight, what kind of birds they were, how many there were, or how they fed. This practice was known as taking the auspices. Auspices is plural, meaning kindly patronage and guidance. Doing research under the auspices of the local historical society. It can also be considered a prophetic sign, especially a favorable sign. as circumstances did not always favor the convenient appearance of wild birds or weather phenomena. Domesticated chickens kept for the purpose were sometimes released into the temple, where their behavior, particularly how they fed, could be studied by the augur. The augural ceremony and function of the augur was central to any major undertaking in Roman society, public or private, including matters of war, commerce, and religion. Augurs sought the divine will regarding any proposed course of action which might affect Rome's good fortune and well-being.
Wow. It seems to me like they were getting into some really bad stuff. Welcome to the lesson entitled Genesis Mathematics, Jubilee Formulas, from Israel to Moses. Embarking on this detailed journey through the genealogical timeline, from Israel to Moses, we will employ the Smith Jubilee Formula to unravel the perfect connections between births, deaths, and significant events. This exploration not only exposes the temporal gaps between pivotal moments, but also serves as a tutorial on applying the third methodology, showcasing the precision and depth inherent in the Smith Jubilee Formula. Join me in deciphering the nuanced intricacies of these Jubilee dates and the underlying calculations that illuminate the path from one key figure to the next. Additionally, we will unveil the precise distance of time from the moment Israel entered Egypt to their momentous exodus, adding a layer of historical context to this comprehensive analysis. What you're looking at is a timeline that spans 368 years. From Israel, the father of 12 sons, who would guide his children to the land of Egypt to escape a famine that was decimating the land. And in doing so, Israel would be reunited with a son that he at the time believed was devoured by a wild beast some 38 years prior. We begin here, in the Jubilee year, 2087. In Jubilees chapter 19, we learn of significant events in the lives of Abraham and his family. The chapter begins with Abraham's return to Hebron and the passing of his beloved wife, Sarah. Despite his grief, Abraham remains patient and faithful to Yahweh, demonstrating his unwavering trust. He seeks a burial place for Sarah, eventually purchasing the land of the double cave in Hebron from the children of Het. This chapter highlights Abraham's enduring faith and commitment to Yahweh's promises. It also introduces the next generation of Abraham's family, including the birth of Jacob and Esau, setting the stage for the fulfillment of divine prophecies and blessings that will shape the destiny of his descendants. In the 4th year of the 42nd Jubilee, following the faithful and patient demeanor of Abraham during the 10th trial, a significant event unfolded in his family's chronicles. This momentous occurrence marked the union of the next generation as Abraham, undeterred by the passing of his beloved wife Sarah, undertook the responsibility of securing a wife for his son Isaac. The spotlight now shifts to the introduction of Rebekah, a woman whose lineage intertwines with the family tapestry of Abraham, further weaving together the threads of destiny. This narrative, chronicled in Jubilee chapter 19 verses 1-9, invites us to witness the continuation of Abraham's legacy and the unfolding of divine plans through the bonds of marriage. Jubilee chapter 19 verse 1 identifies this particular space in time as the 42nd Jubilee, and verse 2 further identifies it as the first year, in the 3rd week. Jubilees chapter 19, verse 10. And in the 4th year thereof, he took a wife for his son Isaac, and her name was Rebekah, the daughter of Bethuel, the son of Nahor, the brother of Abraham, the sister of Laban, and daughter of Bethuel, and Bethuel was the son of Milcah, who was the wife of Nahor, the brother of Abraham. This is the calculation. The 42nd Jubilee times 50 is equal to 2,100. This is the Jubilee year for the 42nd Jubilee. In order to calculate within this Jubilee, we must begin at the start of the 42nd Jubilee cycle. We do this by subtracting 49 years from 2,100. 2,100 minus 49 is equal to 2051. 2051 is the first year, in the first week of the 42nd Jubilee cycle. Verse 2 of chapter 19 is in the third week of the 42nd Jubilee cycle. Verse 10 picks up by saying, "And in the fourth year thereof," meaning that we are calculating the fourth year in the third week of the 42nd Jubilee cycle. The first year of this cycle is already established. So let's add the remaining 3 years to the established first year. 2051 plus 3 is 2054. These 4 years constitute the total number of years in the third week. Now we can add the remaining 2 weeks of years, which is 14 years. 2054 plus 14 is equal to 2068. Now we know that it was in the Jubilee year 2068 that Isaac took a wife, and her name was Rebekah. Jubilees chapter 19, verse 11. "And Abraham took to himself a third wife, and her name was Keturah, from among the daughters of his household servants, for Hagar had died before Sarah. And she bore him 6 sons, Zimram, and Jokshan, and Medan, and Midian, and Ishbak, and Shua, in the 2 weeks of years." Verse 11 tells us a few things. That Abraham took a third wife named Keturah, that Hagar had died before Sarah, and that Keturah bore Abraham 6 sons in 2 weeks. For the sake of this lesson, we will focus on the fact that 2 weeks have passed. Since verse 10 was in the third week, this 11th verse validates the passing of 2 more weeks. That means that 5 weeks have passed. Jubilees chapter 19 verse 12. "And in the 6th week, in the 2nd year thereof, Rebekah bore to Isaac 2 sons, Jacob and Esau." From here we go back to the first year of the 42nd Jubilee, the year 2051, and we add the years. In this case, 2 years. Again, the first year for this calculation has already been supplied. You can thank the fractions from the Jubilee year for that. So we only need to add 1 more year, making 2051 to 2052. These are the 2 years in the 6th week. Now we can add the remaining 5 weeks. 5 weeks of 7 years is equivalent to 7 by 5, which equates to 35. And 2052 plus 35 is equal to 2087. This is the birth year of Jacob and Esau. And this is also our starting point for this lesson. Our next calculation takes place 90 years from this point in Jubilee time. Let me show you the text containing the birth of Joseph. It takes place in Jubilees chapter 28. But let me give you some context before we move on. Jubilees 28 narrates the continuation of Jacob's journey as he arrives in the land of the east to Laban, the brother of his mother Rebekah. He serves Laban for 7 years to marry Rachel, but ends up with Leah due to Laban's deceit. Jacob's relationship with Leah and Rachel, their handmaids, and the birth of their sons are detailed. The chapter sheds light on the customs of the time regarding marriage and inheritance, emphasizing the importance of fulfilling one's commitments. Additionally, it explores themes of envy and prosperity as Jacob's possessions multiply, leading to tension with Laban and his sons. Jubilees chapter 28, verse 24. "And Yahweh was gracious to Rachel, and opened her womb, and she conceived, and bore a son, and she called his name Joseph, on the new moon of the 4th month, in the 6th year in this 4th week." This verse doesn't give us the Jubilee date to be considered for this calculation. To find the Jubilee cycle in question, you would need to backtrack, and after you have found the Jubilee year to be considered for your calculations, you can then move forward while counting the weeks as you go. For this lesson, the Jubilee year for the birth of Joseph is already known to be 2177. To verify the Jubilee for 2177, simply divide 2177 by 50. The answer to this equation is 43.54. Now multiply 43 by 50, and you should get the answer 2150. Because 2150 is the Jubilee year for the 41st Jubilee, any number above 2150 will apply to the 44th Jubilee cycle. Any number between 2150 and 2199 will apply to the 42nd Jubilee cycle. In this case, we need 27 more years to equate to 2177. 27 years is 6 years and 3 weeks. Jubilee chapter 28, verse 24. And Yahweh was gracious to Rachel, and opened her womb, and she conceived, and bore a son, and she called his name Joseph, on the new moon of the 4th month, in the 6th year in this 4th week. Let's add the years and weeks to 2150. 2150 plus 6 is equal to 2156. And 2156 plus 21, which is 3 weeks, equals 2177. Amidst the envy and rivalry between Rachel and Leah, the genealogical tapestry expands with the birth of additional sons and a daughter. The arrival of Joseph, marking a moment of divine grace, becomes a pivotal Jubilee event. However, the text leaves a gap in providing the specific Jubilee date for Joseph's birth. Here, the Smith Jubilee Formula steps in, revealing its power in tracing the chronological thread. The known Jubilee year of 2177 becomes a key, and through meticulous calculations, we bridge the gap, adding years and weeks to the anchor, Jubilee year of 2150. The result is a precise alignment, affirming the birth of Joseph in the 6th year of the 4th week. This journey through the Jubilee cycles, intertwined with family struggles and divine favor, serves as a testament to the accurate interplay of time and destiny. The Smith Jubilee Formula, with its accurate calculations, unveils the hidden layers of chronological significance, reinforcing the understanding of these biblical narratives in the context of Jubilees. All of the Jubilee years that you see in this graphic was calculated by utilizing the Smith Jubilee Formula, which led to the discovery of the third methodology. The beginning of the calculations on this chart starts with the birth of Israel being born in the Jubilee year, 2087, and the final Jubilee year on this chart is that of Moses, presumably on Mount Sinai, receiving the laws, statutes, and commandments, and also the history of the Jubilees since the time of Adam and Eve, culminating in the Jubilee year 2455. The Jubilee year 2177 was the birth of Joseph. It was in the Jubilee year 2194 that Joseph was sold into bondage by his very own brothers, making their father Israel believe that Joseph was killed by a wild beast. It was in the Jubilee year 2216 that Israel went down into the land of Egypt. It was then that there was famine in all that land. 17 years later, in the Jubilee year 2233, Israel, the father of the 12 tribes, died in Egypt, and it was in 2288 that Joseph died. The Jubilee year 2318 marks the beginning of the tribulation of Israel, while at the very same time, the children of Israel began to multiply in the land of Egypt. In 2377, the Savior of Israel from Egypt, Moses, was born, and it was in the Jubilee year 2378 that Moses was saved by the daughter of Pharaoh. And according to the Book of Jubilees, Moses spent 3 weeks of years in the Egyptian court before being brought before the royal court 3 weeks of years later. 21 total years. Moses stayed 3 more weeks of years in the royal court when he killed the Egyptian and hid his body in the sand. That is a total of 42 years for both 3 weeks of years. After which, Moses fled to the land of Midian. There he stayed for 5 weeks and 1 year, which is 36 years. After 36 years, Moses returned to Egypt. 36 years plus 3 weeks of years equals 78 years. Moses entered the royal court in 2377 and returned from the land of Midian when he was 78 years old in the Jubilee year 2455. Because we don't have an understanding of the months or lunar cycles, or the days of the weeks related to the yearly cycles and their connection with the Jubilee cycles, that would allow us to pinpoint the exact days, weeks, and months. From the birth of Jacob to the birth of Joseph is approximately 90 years. And from the death of Joseph to the birth of Moses is also approximately 90 years. Between these two 90-year periods lies 110 years that represent the lifespan of Joseph. It's like two 90-year bookends that are holding up the life of Joseph. Upon recognizing this unique pattern, Mr. Smith also noticed that the life of Joseph was divided into two 55-year periods, and that each of these 55-year periods contained two isolated 17-year periods within each of the separated but also connected 55-year periods. Both 55-year periods contains 38-year periods and 17-year periods. Jubilees chapter 46. 3. And Joseph died being 110 years old. 17 years he lived in the land of Canaan, and 10 years he was a servant, and 3 years in prison, and 80 years he was under the king, ruling all the land of Egypt.